This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream.
Hey, man.
What's up, buddy?
Not much. What's up with you?
Bro.
How you doing? You doing good today?
You look so uncomfortable.
I'm fine.
All right. What's up?
Hey, have you ever heard of the Suburbs?
Like, I feel like I'm thinking like a housing development, but you're thinking like a punk band. Which the Suburbs is a cool band. It's a cool band name.
Yeah. Ironically, if you think about it, I was actually, this is not on subject, but sort of. I was thinking about punk bands the other day, and I was like, what's ironic about punk bands is most punk bands, at least of like probably starting in like the mid 90s, had like the bougiest upbringings, but they talked about their songs were like, oh, I hate everything. I hate my family. But it's like, man, you had a cush life. You had a cush life.
I hate my parents. We grew up in Pennsylvania, middle class. Everything was fine, but it sucked.
Exactly. And like
with the drums like but it sucked.
And it's like their music videos are in their garage. In their parents' garage.
They're insulting their parents.
Driveway.
And how do you like they're in a house that, so let's say your kids are doing it, right? It's your kids in the band.
Yep.
You paid for this home.
Yes, exactly.
This is your garage. You pay a mortgage.
A
mortgage, if you will.
Mortgage, yeah.
And your kids are just out there tearing you to shreds.
In your garage.
And you're just like
walking down your street while the cameraman walks backwards and they sing into the camera.
They're yelling at you like, bring us a bottle of water, Mom. And you're like,
Mom, all I want is a Pepsi. That's a really deep cut. I don't know.
I don't get it.
Yeah, I know you.
But I'm sure no one who listens to our podcast will get it either. So I didn't understand your references, and I'm sure no one else will either.
It's okay. It's fine.
Okay.
So have you ever heard of the Suburbs?
The Suburbs. Are you talking about like the housing
I'm actually
development?
talking about the literal suburbs.
Okay.
Like exactly what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
The Suburbs.
The Suburbs.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Where Ed, and Eddie is set.
Yes, exactly. Actually, and a lot of things like that.
A lot of things are set. The Desperate Housewives live in a suburb.
They live in the suburbs.
Modern Family.
Yeah. Really any sitcom.
Yes.
Most sitcoms. The Office. No.
Hey, Arnold didn't live in a city. He lived in like a city.
But that's a cartoon. That's not a sitcom.
Okay.
Seinfeld was in the city.
Friends. They had an overly expensive apartment.
In the city.
In the city?
In the city, yeah. Okay, this is pointless.
So it's a suburb section, which is a subsection of Barnes & Noble. We're starting a marijuana mecca, you know? Like a commune. Let's start our own city.
Let's start a cult.
We're trying to do it in Bentonville, Arkansas. Like they're trying to make those kind of things.
Exactly. But nowhere else. I was a naked mole rat.
And that's really what the American dream has died. Things I learned last night.
So the suburbs. The Suburbs. So
the Suburbs.
The Suburbs. This is what I'm pretty excited about because here's a little window into how I prep for these episodes.
Okay.
Typically, I read a lot on Wikipedia the night before the episode, and that's kind of it. This episode, when we started filming this new season, like this new half of the season in January.
When I started filming this episode today, I was just
started
like,
making stuff
let's just go for it. You know, how about it's pretty relaxed? How about we just sit down and we just speculate some facts?
See what happens.
You know?
Yeah, no. When we started filming in January, the second half of season 4, I've watched this video about the Suburbs, and it took me down this rabbit hole. And I have watched TED Talks. I have listened to podcasts
about the Suburbs.
Yeah, I've read books. I have dove.
What, do they have a suburb section of Barnes & Noble?
They do. It's actually a little bit further out than everything else.
It's a subsection, if you will.
There's a highway you have to take to get to it. It's a little further. Sometimes.
Well, so it's a suburb section, which is a subsection of Barnes & Noble, which is right next to the subway inside Barnes & Noble. So it's a suburb section, and there's a worker there from a different store, right? Because the person got sick, couldn't cover their shift, so he had to sub for them. So it's a sub in the suburb section of Barnes & Noble.
Next to the subway.
Next to the subway.
Yeah.
They have a Subway inside Barnes & Noble and also outside Barnes & Noble, like right next to Barnes & Noble.
Right
next
next
to another Subway.
Another Subway.
Do you know that Subways outnumber McDonald's?
Yes. Yeah.
It's nuts. Anyway.
It's nuts way.
That's subnuts. I'll tell you what.
Okay, so here's what's. And so I dove really hard into this because one, the history of suburbs is really interesting because it's very new. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But two, what I'm most interested in is did I say subways? Suburbs. I'm going to say subway
That's
accidentally. Okay, so suburbs are they're doomed to fail. And statistically, over time, they all do because of the way they're built.
I guess you'll get to this, but like, is a suburb the same thing as like when a developer buys a bunch of land and then just builds a bunch of houses and sells those houses?
So that's part of a suburb. So I guess we can hit that. So real quick, a suburb is just a town next to a city that the people in that town commute to work.
Suburban.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they commute to
like
work
Mount
in
Vernon
the city.
and Springfield.
Oh my God.
Mount Vernon is a suburb of Springfield.
Okay, technically speaking, by this definition, it could be because what it is it's
a lot of people work in Springfield.
Yeah, it's a town close to a major city that people commute to the major city to work at, but they live
it's
in
because
that
people
city.
are priced out of living in the city. Yes and no.
Not really. Not really.
Okay.
So here's the history. So really, for as long as civilizations exist, since like ancient Sumer, cities have moved through a similar life cycle. And that life cycle is it's settled and people kind of build their shacks of where they're going to live.
Yeah. They shack up.
They shack.
That's what that means, right?
I mean, I guess maybe technically, I don't know. Maybe that's where that came from.
I don't know. I was homeschooled.
So they shack up and and if their shacking goes really well, then they're like, hey, maybe we could build something a little more permanent here.
Got it. Okay. So a kind of metropolis area kind of starts to boom. Some business starts to happen.
Yeah. So what happens is, does
somebody start a business and then people just build around it?
So kinda. What actually happens normally?
How does a city start? Yeah.
Throughout history,
which I know you have
you shack up.
a lot of experience because you've played Cityscape.
Yes. Yeah. Well, City Skylines. Or SimCity, or Cities XL, or Tropico. I mean, there's been a life cycle. But anyways, the life cycle of a city, people shack up in the city, but it's at that point, it's not a city. It's not a city. It's just a.
But I'm saying, do people just go?
Well, they end up there. They build their shacks, and
how
they're
do
like,
they end up there though? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how does a bunch of people decide that this is where we're going to do it?
So they settle. So essentially, what happens is for whatever reason,
they just get tired.
They're not living permanently in any location.
Yeah.
Or they left a location where they're living permanently to look for a new place to live.
Okay.
And there's a lot of reasons someone might do that, but they settle in this location. They build their shacks. And
like when I moved from Springfield to Kansas City, it was because I had an ex who was just showing up at my Starbucks all the time.
Yeah, which could have happened back then.
Back then, the
reason why the Sumerian
in the colonial times is that the whole reason we had to buy the Louisiana Purchase
was to get away from it.
Was to be like I don't even remember who was president when that happened. But they were like, okay, listen, it's been a rough 6 months. All right, she's dating somebody new. We need to
buy Louisiana.
I need to go to a new frontier. I'll tell you what. So.
Jaron, I'm worried about you. You got in this breakup and then you bought Louisiana. I mean, that's an impulse buy.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's a midlife crisis, you know? That was America's midlife crisis, was Louisiana Purchase. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
When you get divorced and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to spend my sunset years alone.
Yeah, let me buy Louisiana.
Let me buy the Louisiana Purchase was more than the state of Louisiana, right?
I know.
I feel like you're just like, let me buy like the bayou. But the word buy is in it. Bayou.
I mean, I can't not buy it. It
I'm
tells
gonna buy
me
you
the
a
name
home.
is to buy you. No, I know that, but it's just funnier to say I'm buying Louisiana than buying
Louisiana Purchase, and then you gotta, and
next
then
to Louisiana,
you know, and then Lewis and Clark set out. They get credit for a lot of stuff that the white people didn't do.
Yeah.
So
they build their shacks.
Okay.
Things go pretty well, and then they turn their they build on top of the shacks, or they tear the shacks down, build something new there, a new, like, more permanent home.
Okay.
And then what typically would happen is
they're not adding to their shacks.
They're not adding to their shacks.
Got it.
But what would happen after that is typically they would add on to their home some sort of income generating addition.
Yeah,
So for some people, that's a restaurant. For some people, that is like they're a stonesmith or a blacksmith, and they have got their workshop.
For me, it's a podcast studio.
For you, it's a podcast studio. Yeah. And for some people, it's a store. So these things happen as their business becomes more successful. What would happen is people would then
move out of the.
Well, actually, what they normally did was their whole home would then become their area of business.
That's what I'm saying.
And they would build on top of it.
Yeah.
And put their home upstairs.
So they lived upstairs.
They lived upstairs. Yeah. And
which in my hometown, the Chinese restaurant, the couple actually lives upstairs.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. And up until the 20th century, it was really common for that kind of cycle to happen. And the more successful a business was, the more units they could put above their home. And so then eventually they would have apartments that they'd be leasing out to a bunch of other people too. That generates more and more income. And the larger a building they could build, they would build expansions and be able to build more. And so it was a very natural growth.
Yeah.
They would try it out. Things would go well. They build on top of it. Things would go well. They just keep building on top of it and top of and top of.
So it seems like the way that business has shifted is that it used to be you would build out of necessity, and now you build out of and you build and then just try to fill it.
Yeah, it's
because like in this apartment complex, there's so many units that are empty.
Yeah. I think a good way to look at it is it used to be all necessity, and now it's more opportunity. And there's no guarantee that opportunity is going to pay off. But
right, because I'm not going to pay rent.
That maybe it will.
Well, that's right. I told him, I said, listen, there's things that you haven't fixed, and I'm not going to pay until you fix them.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and then they were like, we can evict you. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll pay.
And you're like, all right, fine, I'll move out. And they were like, no, you won't.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to go shack up somewhere. I'm going to go
I'm going to go settle in your city.
And see, this is the thing now. You can't just start a city now. And that's really what the American dream has died. All right?
You can't just go
start a new city.
Go start a Chicago.
I thought that. Like, you can't just start a city.
Can you? Sort of. That's the thing with cities is nobody goes and says, this is my new city. People. I hate that mostly because I had a very similar joke I wanted to make today. And I'm very aggravated, but I'm still going to make it later. So
I just pull the mug out.
Yeah, really very frustrated. It is hilarious.
I just did this. I just tried to pour it out. It's underwater. I can't do that. I literally was like, well, they're done with that. I'm going to pour that out.
I love that so much. Okay.
Anyway.
No, what would actually happen is like you, like say you and me and a couple of our friends, we move out to the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then one of us opens a Subway.
That's a cult.
And it gets really successful. And then other people are like, hey, I want to live close to that Subway.
Yeah.
And then over time, over hundreds of years, more and more people end up there, and it just expands and expands. And
so
the more
cities
economic,
are cults.
Cities are cults that succeeded.
Like,
they're successful cults.
Yeah. This used to be the Kansas cult, you know? And then they were like, I think we're a city now.
They're like, that word sounds a little weird. Let's go a city.
Yeah, let's go city. That
KC,
sounds less aggressive.
Yeah, so that's kind of the natural life cycle of a city and how it gets, and that's the way it worked up until.
If people would see a successful business and they would try to open a successful business right next to it.
Yeah, exactly. And people saw that and they're like, okay, I want to live close to that. So they'll build their house next to that, try to start a business next to that. Yeah. And then the local governments would build their infrastructure. So their temples, their churches, their government buildings closer to where all
churches used to be
happening.
The tallest buildings in towns. And what's happened throughout society is that the tallest building, I don't know if it's done subconsciously or even consciously, like it signifies what that culture prioritizes. Right. So our business buildings are the tallest ones.
Yeah. So because
we prioritize economy and money. Yeah. And success and fortune.
Yeah.
But churches used to be the tallest buildings because that's what people prioritize.
Exactly. Yep.
So you get the city, and then people are like, all right, I don't want to live there because I don't like people, but I want to live close to there.
You know, it's interesting. That never happened throughout the 6,000 years that cities were growing.
Yeah.
That never happened. What would happen is it would grow and new things would pop up, but it didn't expand very wide. Suburbanization didn't start until really the post-war era. And
really? Okay.
What sparked it was
the 40s and 50s?
What sparked it was kind of this perfect storm in the U.S.
Industrialization is crazy.
Industrialization is crazy, but the post-war era really took industrialization to a new level because during the war they ramped up everything, and that's why we ended up with such a massive military budget. Is that they just never stopped. Like we just ramped it up to be in war, and then the United States was like, all right, well, we signed all these contracts, and we got to keep doing them. And all these companies got really good at making guns and bombs and planes and trains and automobiles and all these different things. But they got really good at it, and they were making so much, and they were making a ton of money. These private companies, and they're like, okay,
so they can't let that business die.
And they couldn't make as much of it as before. So a lot of them started shifting their business plan, and so around that era is when you start to see consumerism skyrocket in America because all these companies were like, hey, we can mass produce toasters.
You can buy a military helicopter on credit.
No, they're like, okay, we got all this steel. Let's start making toasters. Let's start making refrigerators, cars. Up until that point, there wasn't much of a like Ford was really mass producing cars, but not really many others were.
Right.
In that era, every other company started being able to mass produce cars.
And Volkswagen was like, we got to rebrand. So
they didn't.
The people we were making cars for, they turned out to be literal Nazis. So
what happened was
we did not see that coming. I'll tell you what. VW stands for very wrong. That was their press release. They were like, guys, we're going to be on. And they were kind of ahead because that's a pretty modern press release. They're like, guys, VW stands for very wrong. You know,
and everyone was like, that's weird.
We're really sorry about it as a company. You know, we weren't there. We made a lot of money, but now we are. Buy our cars. And what they realized was, hey, we can sell a lot of these cars, but cities were much more compact and dense at the time. You
didn't need cars as much. Most people walked everywhere.
Are you saying that suburbs were an invention of the car industry?
Not necessarily.
There was capitalized.
There was more people who had cars, and then around the same time, the interstate system was installed. I don't know.
I thought that was the 70s.
It was around the same time they started adding in highways.
That was Eisenhower.
Was he 70s?
That he did the interstate system.
I thought it was. Well, anyways, around the same time,
was he?
They started adding highways and bringing things together, and that made it possible for people to live further from the urban core. And so what happened was real estate investors started to say, hey, there's an opportunity here. More people have cars. There's an easier way to get into the city. There's a lot of cheap land outside the city. And so they would buy massive swaths of land and build houses as cheap as they possibly could.
Which is what developers do still.
And so this was a revolutionary change in the way cities happened, because forever it was, if I wanted a home, I would find a place that I wanted to live with an empty spot of land, and I would build it there myself. And as I grew and I became more successful, I would add on to that or tear it down and build something new when I could. But now, now
I can get a loan and I can get this house.
Instead of there being somebody who actually had a need for the land, they built on opportunity to say somebody might want to buy this. And they also added in the same era 30-year mortgages. Before then, it was only 5-year mortgages. So most people couldn't afford to own something because mortgages were too quick to pay off. So now
30-year mortgage on a. When my grandma bought her house in 72 in Mount Vernon, it was $22,000.
Yeah.
On a 30-year mortgage?
Yeah. Isn't that insane?
It's like $100 a month.
Exactly. It's insane. So it became incredibly affordable for people to be able to move out.
You know what I think about sometimes? I think about that, and I think about in 40 years, people are going to be like, whoa, mortgages should be $1,000 a month. I think about that all the time.
Yeah, that's insane.
Like how milk, half a gallon of milk is $2.
Yeah, that's scary to think about.
Like inflation's going to be, it's just insane that
That's
it's just
really
like,
scary.
it's, I panic about it pretty often.
I hate that you made me think about that.
Sorry. Yeah, you want to think about something different?
Yeah.
Are you ever insecure about your nipples? Like, are you ever like, I don't know if I got, because you've seen other people's, right? You know what they're supposed to look like.
Here's the thing. I used to be because for my chest hair pattern, the first thing that sprouted was right around my nipples, just a ring around my nipples, but nowhere else. I was a naked mole rat. And they were long, little nip hairs.
Yeah.
And so I used to cut them.
Nip hairs.
Before I went to the pool, I'd pull them out and just cut them.
Okay, you held your hand real far out there. So I don't know if that was cartoony or if that was literally how long your nipple hair was.
It was long.
Yeah. I don't know.
long.
So far in this podcast, we've said shacking up and we've said nipple hair. I think we've got to change it to explicit. I don't know if we're family friendly anymore. But wow, you quit your job at the church and we just really dove in, didn't we?
Hey, we want to take a second to thank this week's sponsor, CuriosityStream. Man, this is one of my favorite services. I actually am subscribed to this, and I love it. For $3 a month, you can get access to thousands of documentaries. It's a documentary streaming service, just like Netflix. You go on there, all kinds of documentaries in science, technology, history, you name it, they got it. And it was even created by the dude who used to run Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, Science TV. So really reputable documentaries all throughout it, and it is awesome. Only $3 a month. You can't get a better deal for anything like this. Yeah. I watch it all the time. You can sign up at TILLN.com/curiositystream today. Anyways. So they
were building on opportunity.
They're building on opportunity.
They're like, someone might want this.
Yeah.
Which is what all of business is now, is you just kind of try to do something and be like, maybe people will want. You end up losing so much money in business because of that.
And if you're right,
but that's just the cost of business.
You can make a ton of money.
Yeah.
And that's the thing.
But if you're wrong,
right. They painted this American dream where you own a home, you own a car, you have your own land, your own toaster, whatever you want.
Yeah.
You have it. And
hey,
people
tell you
flock
what,
to
you
that.
buy this house, we'll throw in a toaster for free.
Yeah, and people flock to it.
Seems like a good deal.
People started flocking to the suburbs, really, and so people started flocking to the suburbs. And what this did is this created a system of suburbanization in America that was never happened before in the history of the world.
Yep.
So we had no template to say this is how this works.
Okay.
And so what happened was these suburbs would pop up, and they generally would go to neighboring towns that already had an existing downtown. And so when you look at towns like closer to the city, they usually have this historic downtown.
Yeah.
And they'll say that this town has been here since like 1880, and that's true, the downtown. But the suburbs that grew up around it were in this suburbanization era. And what is
so before it was just another kind of city.
Yeah, just a small city.
The other one took off.
Yeah,
the bigger city.
The bigger city took off, and then that needed more population.
Yeah.
And those people wanted their own home, so their town grew around this urban center. That's the smaller downtown area in that town. Well, you fast forward the picture to the 80s, 90s era, late 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And they started building around shopping malls. And so it's the same thing. They went further out into bigger empty spaces. They built this massive shopping mall and built all their homes and neighborhoods around the shopping mall, which is both of these systems you would never see in a city of the past. It would be your homes would be littered in with your commercial areas and your working areas because people walked everywhere. So it had to be close. But now with the cars, people could be further from everything they needed. And so there'd be one central shopping mall, and then there'd be like strips of stores and offices and restaurants and stuff. But for the most part, the city was built around this shopping mall.
Yeah.
And you fast forward that even further.
Built this city on shopping malls.
There you go.
Okay.
Late 90s through the 2000s.
I thought it was funny. I was trying something.
Okay.
It cut deep.
Well, I mean, okay. Anyways, so then
you come to my house. Go ahead.
So in the mid 90s, that shifted again. Because what you saw is when the shopping malls, the suburbs of the shopping malls blew up, the suburbs with the
actual city
with the downtown area, those all shut down and shuttered because they couldn't sustain anymore.
Yeah, they can't say that because the people. Yeah.
Well, now the further out suburbs open up, and they are all centered around the big box stores. And so they have the Walmart, the Target, the Home Depot, the Best Buy, and everything. Most cities have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these little centers where there's big box stores, and then around that are all your restaurants, your banks.
Like I live in a suburb.
Stores. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And now all the homes wrap around that. I have a
Kansas City address though. What's your address say?
Blue Springs.
That's right, you piece of junk. You don't live in Kansas City.
Okay, whatever.
KC Mo or KC No.
All right.
I think you're trash is what I'm saying.
And so you get this kind of new era of suburbs. Here's the issue with all of this.
Yeah.
It's
just spreading so much stuff out.
Is these suburban cities, they cannot sustain themselves.
They can't exist without the big city?
Mm-hmm. And so
you think so?
Yes, they are financially insolvent. And
Why?
the data shows that this always happens. And it's
why are they financially insolvent though?
Because cities rely on taxes for their income. Right. When
but if you start a suburb, that's its own municipality. Mm-hmm. So that suburb is getting that tax revenue
from the suburb only.
Because I have a Kansas City address, my taxes go to Kansas City.
Yes.
But you have a Blue Springs address, so you're destroying my city.
Well, my taxes go to Blue Springs, but here's the issue. In a traditional city, so I read.
But you still use the resource and the everything of downtown.
Yep. That's the issue. So
you're paying taxes for Blue Springs, but you're using the resources of Kansas City, Missouri, but you're not contributing the resources of Kansas City, Missouri.
I am. And we'll get to that.
Okay.
So I read this book called Strong Towns. I can't remember
Strong
the author's.
Towns?
Yeah, I can't remember the author's name, but he's got this whole thing on building
Sounds
strong towns.
Sounds like a Mark Driscoll book for city planners. You know, it's like Strong Towns.
Yeah, that's actually pretty accurate.
That's what it seems like. Yeah.
Description.
Each town has to wake up every morning and chop down a tree. I'm John Eldridge, and this is how you make strong towns.
So he talks
Wild
about,
at heart of the city. That's a book right there. I'll tell you what.
He talks about 2 blocks in his neighborhood where he grew up. And in these blocks, they're separated by 1 block of just regular residential homes. One of the block is kind of your traditional city style blocks where it's 3 to 4 story buildings. Yeah. There's 5 or 6 buildings wall to wall right next to each other on this block.
Okay.
First floor has commercial units, and then second, third, or fourth floor, however tall they are, have offices or residential units.
Yeah.
So there's about 15 or 20 tenants in this building. The building's an older building. It's been around for about 100 years, but it's sitting there on that lot, right? 2 blocks over, there is a Taco John's. But the Taco John's was built in the 2010s. Yeah. And it was built after the unit that was there that was very similar to the other block was blighted. Do you know what that means? Have you heard of blighted?
Torn down?
No. Well, yeah. But so there's this thing called blight where a government can declare a property blighted. Basically, it means that it's in disrepair or really just ugly. They think it's ugly.
Yeah, that's what happened in my hometown. They tore down a whole really historic block.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the government can just declare a building or a block or an entire neighborhood blighted, and they can just level it and build whatever they want there to replace it.
Yeah, it's kind of what you wish you could do with people.
What?
Not like you know what I'm saying. Not like groups of people. That's genocide. But I mean sometimes you just look at a person and you go, I in my mind you're blighted. Like you don't exist to me. Like
you're in line at Starbucks.
You're so annoying, and I hate you as a person.
Yeah.
That you're blighted from my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You're in line at Starbucks and a lady asks to speak to the manager, and you're like, that's blight. Like somebody tear her down.
Take her out. I would like to speak to the mayor because I've got someone who needs to be blighted. And they just get freaking slingshotted into the sun. Just yeah. That's where cancel culture is going.
Yeah, we're gonna start blighting.
We're gonna
people.
start slingshotting people into the sky. They come down 2 miles later. It's kind of like shooting a gun in the air. They got to come down. So they come down. Yeah, they end up in a different suburb.
Gosh.
Go terrorize somebody else.
So yeah,
go ruin somebody else's life.
Blight is actually really sad because the government just takes someone's property.
Is it like eminent domain?
It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Eminent domain, they can just be like, hey, the government needs this property.
Yeah, it's if the government has a need. But blight is if they say, hey, your house is ugly.
The government doesn't have a need. The government has an opportunity.
The government just doesn't like your property.
Yeah.
It's ugly
like, this
to
is
us.
Bad
and we don't want to look at it anymore. Well, so we're going to tear it down.
Like as far as the city planning kind of go, you go, this block, this building is ruining the aesthetic.
Yeah, it is ruining the aesthetic.
Which would make sense for and the reason they do that, which is not justifiable at all, but I mean, essentially they're just taking it from people who can't afford to pay that block.
Well, in theory, but it actually doesn't work out that way. So
Because I imagine that in theory they're thinking rundown buildings, things like the West Bottoms, when they were all just completely crapped out.
Yeah. So if it's vacant, then yes, that's true.
Sure. But if it's owned by somebody,
but it often happens where it's not vacant and they have tenants in all the units, and they just want to build something else there that they think would look nicer.
I hate that.
So
does that happen a lot to white people? Who does it happen mostly to?
It's literally all of your marginalized people groups is who it happens to the most.
What's interesting, are you going to talk about redlining in this?
We'll touch on it, but we won't talk about it a lot.
Okay, because have you seen the redline map of Kansas City?
Yeah.
It's aggressive.
Insane. It's insane.
Okay.
And that happened in line with suburbanization, and that's part of why suburbanization was such a big boom, is really because of redlining and the white flight.
Because this area was deemed not great for business, almost exclusively because it was black people.
Yeah.
And then because it's not deemed good for business, obviously you can't work there or build a business there. So you try to get a loan somewhere else. Anyway, suburbs.
So that was a sort of symptom that led to suburbanization.
Got it.
But I don't think it was the only thing that happened.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, and it's really sad. It's very bad. But
so the government can basically just say, I don't like what's on this block.
Yeah, your house is ugly. I'm going to tear it down.
Okay.
And that's what they did in this neighborhood. And so he talks about the tax revenues.
Slingshot your house into the sun.
What's really interesting is he talks about the tax revenues between those two blocks.
Okay.
And there's a vast difference between the two. And you might think that the Taco John's would make a lot more money, but that's not true. The Taco John's, because they moved in there, they got a tax break to move into that property.
Yep.
And they are able to land a lot of other tax breaks for things like keeping the property, making it look nice.
So that's how a city will incentivize businesses to come here, is like, hey, we'll give you, you don't have to pay this much taxes for the next 10 years or whatever.
Exactly.
But then what happens is the business exists for 10 years and they move somewhere else.
They move. Yep, exactly. And so they live off of their tax breaks for 10 years, while this other unit, while they are paying less taxes per unit, they have 20 units in this block, where the other one has 1 unit that's getting a massive tax break. This other one has 10 units that is providing a lot of different taxes, because they're getting property taxes from the building owner.
Yep.
They're getting sales taxes from the stores in the lower level, and they're getting business taxes from the businesses that are in there, and they are getting taxes from the tenants who are renting space.
Right.
And they're getting taxes from income taxes from the people who work there. So it's generating a ton of tax revenue from a lot of different sources. That one unit where Taco John's
is getting a
massive tax break, and then their income tax and their sales tax from that is they're selling an incredibly cheap product, so the sales tax is almost null, and they're paying their employees almost nothing, so their income taxes is almost null. So what has happened here is there's almost this promise of this will provide more value for the area, but it doesn't. It actually eats up value for the area, because it takes up a larger piece of land than the units before and gives less money back.
Yeah.
And
well, did you see what Kansas City legislation did as far as like because people are building condominiums? That's all they're building downtown right now is new places to live. Yeah. But did you see what they did for the tax breaks? If you want to take advantage of the Kansas City tax breaks, you have to include a certain number of units that are affordable housing units.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you have to include a few units that are under $1,000 a month.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's something. This guy with the Strong Towns idea, he's been traveling, doing conferences and stuff in the city planning world, and he's getting.
Well, I would hope that he's traveling.
Yeah.
I hope that he's not just like, I wrote a book called Strong Towns, and I've never left mine.
And so he's actually starting to make waves in the city planning world, and people are starting to be like, okay, there's something to this.
Yeah.
But his big point is this could never be successful, because it relies
so much on the downtown, but then the downtown's giving away their revenue.
Well, here's what's even more difficult about it. So not only do you have units that are taking up larger land, because now you have malls and Walmarts that are getting those tax breaks, taking up massive chunks of land, and a lot of them are actually passing off things like their parking lot to the city to maintain. So the city has that liability,
is using resources,
to maintain it, but they're not getting income as if they would have had multi-use units in there as the cities of the past. And even beyond that, single-family homes in the past were relatively rare. Most of the time in cities, you would have multifamily homes or buildings with multiple unit use types.
I was just reading about how the nuclear family is a modern invention. Before the 1920s, the nuclear family of mom, dad, kids
Yeah, it was
didn't
pretty rare.
really exist. Yeah, it was pretty rare because it was multi-generational families.
Yeah, you would have your grandparents and like your cousins would
You
live with
all
you. Like,
live in the same, building or
and so then,
area.
So then those single units on a plot of land would be worth more tax revenue because there was more people there to pay taxes, and there was more properties there that people own to pay taxes, and more
People are living there, so they're spending money there. Yeah.
Yep. But this compound.
Do you think a lot of the problems that we created in the 50s and 60s and 70s are things that are irreversible now, or? Because it seems like there's been enough loopholes and enough big businesses that have taken advantage of it. Like you can't just change things on Amazon now.
Yeah. I don't think anything's irreversible. Okay. I think there's a lot. It's a lot.
I think it would be a very hard turn, and so many people would fight against it.
100%. And that's the issue with strong towns, which we'll get to that in a second.
Did he also write a book called Weak Towns?
Yeah. So the bigger issue with the suburbs, even bigger than this tax problem, is that not only are each of their plots of land in their city worth less tax revenue to them, they are larger.
Yep.
So they have a higher infrastructure liability. They have to maintain all the roads. They have to maintain all the sewers. They have to maintain all the gas lines, electric lines, water lines, whatever. And they cover a lot more land than their population can sustain versus how much infrastructure they have.
Yeah.
So the cost is higher than the income that they have.
Right, for sure.
And that multiplies when you figure the fact that in the suburbs, so many people, like you said before, rely on the city in the center.
Yep.
So people don't work there. They go into the city and they feed that economy by working in that economy. And they pay their income taxes to the city because that's where they work, not in their suburb. And then when they're in the city, they're working, they're going to restaurants in the city, they're going to stores in the city, and then they're coming home. Or when they go out on the weekend, the city has better entertainment, so they travel to the city and they feed the city's economy, which feeds the city's tax wealth, not their suburbs. And so the suburbs are in a situation where they are not.
So the city's getting that revenue.
Yes. The city's getting the revenue off of sales tax and income taxes.
But the suburb cities are having to maintain the Walmart parking lots and stuff.
Yeah. And they're having to maintain all the roads and everything in there. But people don't have to do everything in that city. And so they often travel to other suburbs and to the main city to conduct business and make purchases and find entertainment, entertaining things to do on the weekend. So they are feeding that economy and thus taking away from their economy. And so what we see happen, and we now have the data to watch this, is as you look at suburbs.
Well, and it's, I heard a proverb when I was in youth group all the time that the fed dog wins.
What?
Whichever dog you feed wins.
Oh, I thought you meant like the federal dog.
Did you hear that when you were growing up, like in youth group, and they would always, for some reason, they would always be like, "This is a Native American tale," and you're just like, "Why are you including this detail?" But anyway, they'd be like, "What was that?"
I was just gonna drink.
You were gonna drink.
I did drink.
You drank this water?
Yeah, I just leaned it and just.
Why'd you do
just
that?
Like kind of like.
Yeah, I don't think you should do that.
Well, I did it.
Oh.
Is it chlorinated?
Oh yeah, I mean like pretty heavily.
I mean that's okay. I've done it before.
Why'd you do that? Okay. Anyway, so was that your bit? That was what you were waiting on.
That was the bit that I was.
All right. Do you want a mug to drink out of?
I have a mug. This was just. What else you got down there?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I start pulling things back.
Pulling items.
We should do an episode while we're snorkeling. Anyway,
so what happens?
Okay, but here's no.
Okay,
I was finishing the thing. When you're in
the
youth
fed
group,
dog.
the fed dog. There's like they're just it's just like two dogs. They're in a fight. The one that you feed's gonna win, and they did it a whole like starve your fears.
Yeah.
And you gotta feed your faith and starve your fears.
Yeah.
Because if you feed your faith's gonna win.
Yeah.
Do you hear that all the time?
Yeah, I've heard that.
I heard that all the time, especially when I traveled with that evangelist. That was one of his favorite things.
We should make a fed dog shirt, but it's like
fed dog,
and it's wearing like an FBI jacket.
I was just gonna say it's a dog that has like glasses on it and everything. Yeah, it's on our website. You can buy it.
I love that. So what would happen is
you can also buy a shirt that is our TILLN set that just says "tub in it." It's in the YouTube description right now.
So The issue here, and we have the data to watch this now, is the infrastructure in these suburbs have about a 30-year life cycle. So the suburban towns have enough revenue to maintain and sustain, but the second they have to start to replace, they cannot afford it. And so at about 30 years, give or take, every suburb starts to decay. Okay. And what happens then is, since these suburbs have been insolvent for so long, they don't have the revenue to fix everything. So they have to pick and choose. Yeah. And what happens is a lot of these neighborhoods start to fall apart because their pipes start to be ineffective, their sewers start to be ineffective.
So you can't get people to move in. You can't get revenue bringers to live there.
Exactly. So then all the wealthier individuals in those towns move to the new suburb that just got built the next town over. That has a 30-year life cycle. And that does the same thing. After about 30 years, all that infrastructure starts to decay. Do you think that people
eventually move downtown?
So here's what's interesting that's happening.
A lot of people are moving downtown right now.
If you look at most major cities that were lively in that post-war era, you can follow this life cycle out. So you see that first ring of suburbs.
Houston is probably one of the biggest metro systems I've seen. Like their suburbs are massive.
Yeah, and they just keep going. Yeah. And so you follow any of those cities out. Detroit is kind of your poster child for this, but any city has this, where your first set of suburban towns outside the city were the ones built in the 50s, 60s. And so those have already decayed. And if you look at them,
that's like North Kansas City.
Yeah. All those neighborhoods are the neighborhoods that are falling apart. Yeah. With just,
the people who live there are trash.
Yeah. Right. Well, the places, they're places.
Alex lives in North Kansas City.
There are places where the homes are falling apart, and the value of those neighborhoods has gone down, and the cities can't sustain those.
But then what happens is investors go, "That's cheap property." Mm-hmm. So it's just a cycle.
Well, that's not clear yet, because that's a new thing. And then
you're right. We haven't lived through the cycle enough.
You spread the city out to the ones that were built in the 80s and 90s, and those are the ones that are just now starting this process of decay. Okay. And so they're starting to fall apart, and people are starting to take their flight out. And so in the mid 2000s and the early 2010s, you saw this new boom of this new era of suburban homes. Okay. And now those neighborhoods in the 80s and 90s. So you almost have two rings of these suburban areas that were once the area where the wealthy lived, and they migrated out, and then they migrated out. This last era is a really interesting era because that's when gentrification really started. Yeah. People started moving back into the urban centers and then to that first ring of neighborhoods because property was super cheap and renovating that property. And so this is kind of the time where it's...
So do the people who lived in the city before now have to move to the rundown suburbs?
Yes. Yeah. And so it's basically what's happening is wherever the wealthy people migrate out of is where
like a ripple
the middle
effect.
class...
And like they move in and push the people out, which pushes lower income out.
Exactly. And the issue with this is very interesting because I'm really interested. I haven't seen anybody talk about this, but I'm really interested to watch what happens over the next like 20-ish years whenever the most recent suburban boom starts to collapse. Because it will. Everything in the past two urban booms shows us these will
So your
collapse.
House that you live in 15 years, you're going to have to get out of it.
Well, not even, because my house was built in 71. And so honestly, my neighborhood's on the back end where it's getting to the point where it's going to hit this decay point.
So you got to get out soon.
Yeah. So if I want to avoid this, I need to get out soon. And it's evidence.
TILLN Hype House?
And it's
what if we live together, right? Remember we used to be roommates? Okay.
I remember that.
You know, I'll get married to somebody. It's my 3rd anniversary. And then we could just all live together.
Yeah, there's a good idea.
Let's get back to, not even multi-generational, but multi-family homes, like a commune. Yeah, let's start our own city.
Let's start a cult.
Hey, if you're listening to this, if you're a TILLN listener, just outside of Kansas City, we're starting.
There's this place called Osceola. They have really good fudge.
There's this place, we're starting a marijuana mecca, okay? And so if people don't understand that reference, we did an episode. Please don't think that we're anyway. Shacking up, marijuana mega, talking about your nipple hair. Wow, this is an explicit episode now.
Here's the thing.
You might as well say a cuss word. You want to say one together?
Yeah,
ready? 1, 2, 3, crap. So, wow, look at us. Just losing our 14-year-old audience.
Hey, thank you so much for checking out Things I Learned Last Night. If you like what we're doing and want to help us do more of it, you want to help us reach more people, please consider joining us on Patreon. It's a way that you can financially support this podcast and help us to reach more people, but also you'll get a lot of really cool stuff in return. You get early access to episodes, bonus content, and special merch that only gets sent to Patreon supporters. So that is TILLN.com/join, TILLN.com/JOIN. And you can check that out there for more information. If not, thank you again for even being here and checking out our podcast.
So here's what I'm interested to watch.
Yeah.
Is as this newest form collapses, what will happen? Because
people will move back to the city. I think it's going to be a cycle. I don't think people will spread out so far.
I don't know. I don't think they will, but at the same time, there is a move in like the tech world to build these bullet trains and the vacuum trains, the underground vacuum trains that could get you to cities quicker, because they're thinking, oh, hey, cities just need to expand more to support the population.
That's not what's happening.
Put a pin in that. I really want to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
But what I'm really interested to watch is over time, what you've seen is when the suburban area collapses and there's a boom, the middle class moves in to the one that falls apart. And then when the new one falls apart, they move into a new one. The middle class moves up to that one, and then your working class, your lower economic class, moves into the oldest one, and that's what's happened over history. There will be a point where that means if this cycle continues the way it's cycling,
there's too many houses.
They have to move. The lowest income class would theoretically need to be moving into the houses we're building now. But in the 2000 eras, the houses that we're building now are not sustainable for someone who is making a lower income,
right?
Because they're huge.
They're massive.
We're
you
building
can't heat
giant
them.
houses. Yeah, you can't pay for the bills.
Same thing like a luxury car. It was, as soon as someone wins the lottery, they buy a luxury car, but they can't afford to stay in a luxury car.
Exactly. And so
which is why I drive a Honda Civic.
So unless
that TikTok money's not coming in that much.
Unless gentrification is what happens and
right.
people move back into the city, but even still, you would still have those people would have to go somewhere. So do you think
that towns like Mount Vernon, like small towns, are going to see a boom?
I mean, they would. Eventually, if this continues, it's the suburban area is just going to spread and spread.
So you have the working class people who have to drive an hour and a half to their job.
That's the issue. You now have these neighborhoods, these suburbs that were built in the 2000s of houses that are way too big for any working class person to support financially. Right. Even though the land value might have dropped and they can afford to buy into the house, they can't afford to upkeep that. They can't afford to pay the bills for that. It's too big. And so I'm curious what will happen, because to me, I'm like, they're not going to be able to move there because one, it's too big, but two, they can't commute that long.
Yeah.
It makes sense to commute 45 minutes to an hour and you're making $100,000 a year. But if you're making $30,000 a year, you're just going to find a different job.
Hopefully.
Or not move, And so it just doesn't make sense for that.
But that's where people are stuck, dude. I mean, I've got friends who live down in Olathe and they can't find a job down there, so they work up here in the Northland.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's
it's just like, dude, you're driving 45 minutes for a minimum wage, close to minimum wage job.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm curious to watch what happened with these giant neighborhoods.
Is there a population boom or not?
Well, so here's what's interesting: is population is growing, but with that, you hear people say
pretty exponentially too.
Yeah, you hear people talk about it like we're running out of space, and cities have to get wider and wider and wider.
No, we're not.
But what's interesting is when you look at cities in other countries compared to cities in America, most cities in other countries don't have this suburbanization thing happening. Most of them are much denser throughout, and they just sort of end at one point. They have suburbs since suburbanization happened. Some of these bigger cities started having suburban areas, but it's nothing like America. America's got the suburban sprawl in every city. So, for example, if we look at Kansas City is a population of about 2.5 million people, the whole metro. If you include the entire metro area, it's about 2.5.
Okay.
That statistical metro area, that includes pretty much anybody who's commuting into Kansas City to work in the city. 2.5 million people, and they take up almost 9,000 square miles of land.
Okay.
London was founded in 47 AD. So it's been around.
Serious?
Yeah, it's been around for a long time.
That's wild.
They have a population of almost 15 million. They cover 3,300 square miles.
A third of the size of Kansas City with 7 times the amount of people.
7 times the population, because they followed
What's
the
Los
natural
Angeles,
growth of the
do you
city. Los Angeles is at about, I think it was 7,000 square miles, and the population for their entire metro is around 19 million. So they're a bit bigger.
7,000 square miles. They're still smaller than Kansas City.
And that's an interesting phenomenon, even in America, is as populations grow, the cities become denser. And so your biggest cities in America, your New Yorks, your LAs, your Chicagos, even like Phoenix and Miami, things like that, they become denser, and the sprawl starts to slow.
So then what
they sprawl
happens
out
then
really
is that
wide.
if there's not enough sprawl for people to go to, where does lower income people go?
So what ends up happening is
They're forced out?
I don't think they're forced out. I think they end up in the higher density areas where there's smaller homes or smaller apartments in higher density units.
Wow.
But what is interesting, to give you perspective,
I say as I live in a pretty small apartment.
London, 3,300 square miles. The Springfield metro includes probably Mount Vernon, Branson. So the whole anywhere where
it includes
people,
all that. It includes Nixa, Republic,
definitely,
Ozark.
definitely. But anyways, 3,000 square miles. So
15 million people crammed there,
could live in that area,
which is why
and
no one
that's what-
drives there. You can't drive
Yeah.
in that.
And that's
what's New York?
natural.
What's Manhattan?
I don't know exactly offhand what Manhattan is. I know Manhattan's pretty small itself.
Sure.
But the New York metro is much larger.
Right.
But
That's pretty crazy. I don't know. Do you think people are moving to cities out of small towns?
oh yeah, there's definitely statistically much more people in America live in urban areas than live in rural areas today. Most people are moving into cities, but it's not. I mean, it's not this. I don't know. It's not insane.
Yeah. It's not like a emergency.
Yeah.
Some people are making it like there's this great migration.
But what we did is we built these built to suit cities that can't sustain themselves.
What's interesting to me is in some of these cities that we'll go to, there almost seems to be suburbs.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting thing that's happening. And those are what I think might be the saving grace for a lot of cities. So you have these suburbs like Overland Park, or in Atlanta you have Buckhead, or Denver has DIA, where they have I call it the Silicon Valley effect, where it's a suburb of a major city, but a bunch of businesses have boomed there and built major office spaces, which have sparked convention centers to move in, which brought
Atlanta,
hotels.
they're called the Buckhead Blondes because that's where like the rich people live.
Exactly. And then that brings a new suburb in that area. And then something strange happens where those attract people from outside that suburb to come to that suburb. And then a new suburb comes in. I think those are the only suburban areas that have a shot of living because they
build their own economy.
Yeah, they can sustain themselves.
Yeah.
They're not leeching off of that city as
What
much
happens
as
if
other
a city
suburbs.
dies?
So that's what's happening in Detroit right now. And that's what's very interesting is that city itself has lost so much industry that the suburbs, before they were leeching off that city, now
The city is leeching off the suburbs.
Yeah, and now
It's just feeding off itself.
Nobody can take care of their debts to repair
It's like
anything.
that super unhealthy friend group you've ever been a part of, right? Where you're like really unhealthy and your friend's really unhealthy, and then like you guys are just like encouraging each other. Like, should I text? Like, should I? I should hunt that girl down.
I should go over there.
You know, I see that she just posted a picture at Mud House. I'm gonna go show up at Mud House.
Here's what makes me nervous is these new suburbs. I don't see right now unless they level it.
Are the people in Detroit angry?
Yeah.
Are they? No. I mean, like, you know how like people like Boston, they got like that, I'm mad kind of thing. You know,
Yeah.
people in Detroit got that thing. Because they should call it Roit Rage. If they are, you know, like when you get Roit Rage.
Oh my gosh. I hate that so much.
Anyway, finish what you're saying.
I think the only possible way that this newest ring of suburbs can survive is if they level it, because there's no way anybody is going to live there. All the businesses are going to move out, and it's proven. Even most businesses will only stay in their locations for about 10 years. So the life cycle of those businesses is shorter because that's when their tax breaks end. So they move out. That's why your Walmart in your town is never there for more than 15 years, because it runs out of tax breaks and it moves out to a few blocks away.
Well, I was gonna say, the
And you're
one.
like, why are they building a new Walmart? They have a perfectly good one right down the street.
Well, the one in my town built it on the property right behind
Yeah, because they're like, oh, we can buy that,
and get the same tax
get
break.
the same tax breaks, and it's cheaper to renovate
I
it.
hate corporations.
Yeah, and so all the businesses will move out, and then all the people will move out. And I think in this one, people won't be able to move in. Small businesses won't be able to afford to move in.
Yeah, you can't put a small business in a Walmart.
Yeah, lower income people won't be able to afford to move in.
That's when I see all these Kmarts for sale.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
who's going to buy that?
The only
Just
thing
the
that could go
megachurch.
there is, I was going to say, it's a mega church.
Exactly.
That's literally the only thing that could go there in my head.
Exactly. And so...
Unless you chop it into smaller...
Yeah, exactly. And that's the issue that the suburban world is I think, in my head, the way I see this happening is your downtown and your close ring of your first suburbs will get totally gentrified and be incredibly wealthy. And then you'll have your first wing where that's your lowest income.
What's happening in Kansas City.
Yeah, your first ring is your lowest income, and then your middle class. And then what I'm actually think might happen is this most recent ring, nobody will be able to afford it.
They'll have to tear down trailer parks.
Yeah, it'll either get torn down or it'll just be a massive ring of ghost towns around the city. And then there'll be a new suburb built outside of it that's incredibly wealthy.
Wow.
Because that's the route that it's going. And this one is just so much more unsustainable than the previous suburbs. And so the guy who wrote Strong Towns talks about how he's like, we need to get away from this model and start building multi-use buildings again.
Yeah.
Especially in suburbs, because the suburbs can't sustain themselves unless they start to do that. And so his kind of point is we need to go back to the way people have done it throughout history, because that's the better way to build a city. We can't buy 300 acres and build a shopping mall on it and say, hey, we're building to the last level of growth, because you don't know that can sustain that yet.
Right.
You haven't proven it. You haven't let it grow. You just built on it and started from the top. And then when that shuts down, what happens? You have a massive empty parking lot.
What if you sell your house?
Yeah.
You and I go in together on a Kmart. We build a mega house, a podcast studio. All right. Okay. We build a room. We build an indoor
house.
What about a trampoline park? Why not? Okay. We've got a podcast studio. Okay. We've got 2 18-hole golf courses.
Oh my God.
We've got a ski lodge. And to top it all off, a mirror maze. That's what they gotta turn these suburbs into, is just giant mirror mazes. You can drive through. Drive through a mirror maze. Drive through a mirror maze.
So when you're on the interstate, you don't have to see the blight.
You call it a rear view mirror maze. Come on. Come on. You have to back through it. It's pretty dangerous.
Yikes.
Well,
yeah, dude. So the suburbs are a mess and they're doomed to fail. This guy goes as far as to call them a Ponzi scheme. He's like,
they are, because it's really like when you buy a house there, like you bought that house, and then in 5 years, if that development goes under, you're the last person who invested in it.
Yeah,
so you're stuck with that loss.
Yeah. So basically,
because that's all that these businesses are, it's just a matter of return on investment for the original investors, and then just stick the loss with somebody else.
Yep. So basically, the thing I've learned in this whole cycle, which I learned after I bought my house, which is unfortunate, is when you buy a house, or any property for that matter,
you can still sell it.
Look at the life cycle of that suburb.
Yeah.
And
where they're at.
Are you close to that part where their infrastructure is going to break down? Because it's different for every city and different based on what they built, but it's roughly 30 years is what they get.
How far is Blue Springs from downtown?
I don't know. I think it's like, it takes
I have
me about
a show in
25
Kansas
minutes.
City, and I posted on Facebook about it, and someone from Blue Springs commented and said, let me know when you're in Blue Springs.
Just drive to... Yeah, it's literally like... it'll take me like 21 minutes.
If you do that to me, if you're like looking at my tour schedule and you're like, when's Jaron coming to a city near me? And he looks and you're like, oh, that's 20 minutes away. I'll wait till he's closer. I hate you. I don't ever want you to come to my show.
They probably won't.
They probably won't. It's too far away. You want me to you want to DoorDash a comedy show? You want me to come in and ring your little Ring doorbell and do it in your camera?
Yeah. So
anyway,
his whole proposal is we've built car-centric cities.
What's the solution? Yeah.
We built car-centric cities, so his solution is we need to get away from car-centric cities. It's kind of, you mentioned it in our
15-minute cities.
You mentioned it in our mall episode, our American Dream, where it's like I think you can see it in the video where you said, yeah, that was the vision for malls originally, was that you live there, you work there, you play there. And I kind of like paused because I was like in the middle of this research, and I was like, yeah, that's the vision for cities.
Right. Well, I was saying, like, so right now what they're doing is these 15-minute cities where all of your needs would be within a 15-minute walk.
Yep,
and that's what they're trying to do in Seattle. That's what they're trying to do in Bentonville, Arkansas. Like, they're trying to make those kind of things.
Exactly.
Which would... And here's where you're going to get lost in messaging. Here's where it's difficult, is that as soon as you make it about like cars or whatever, I think people feel like they give up their autonomy that way.
Yep, exactly.
And so the ultra conservative side of people goes, well, I want to keep my car. And then as soon as you make it like, less cars, less emissions, then they're like, oh, cool, that's not even real anymore. So there's so many like messaging hurdles you have to jump over.
It's really tough because anybody who lives in the suburbs, you enjoy the freedom that the suburbs have given you, and to the solution to this problem literally is multifamily homes. You don't want to live in a multifamily home,
right?
Yeah.
Well, you went to the suburbs for the space and for the less crowding,
and to own your own land. Like you have your own plot of land, you have your own house, you have your own car. Like it's all your own. Where the solution is multifamily.
In city anyway.
Yeah.
Or move to a town, like a small town.
Yeah. True.
I mean, if you got an online business now though, you can live in the middle of nowhere.
It's true.
So I just choose to live in the city because I kind of want to do things still.
There's a city in Saudi Arabia, a proposed city. It hasn't started, but the government proposed a city that's a straight line, 100-mile straight line. And the idea of this city, which sounds stupid, and it kind of is, but it's not at the same time. So the idea is that there's no roads. And so the city is it's 100 miles of straight lines of clumps of buildings. And so there are towers, skyscrapers, lofts, apartments.
A train that runs down the middle or what?
Well, the way it works is everything is within walking distance in that clump. And there's all your services, all your businesses, everything's in that 15
She used multiple
distance.
great clips in this big building?
Well, here's what's interesting about it. Let me tell you what's interesting. This is what's interesting.
Please tell me what's interesting.
They have an underground network. So the network underground, the first layer of the underground is your shipping network. And so that's shipping up and down the whole city.
Okay.
Goods and services, basically. And then the layer below that is the vacuum tunnels for the vacuum trains that could go from one end to the other in 15 minutes.
And the layer below that is for the low-income people, the tunnel people.
It's the
tunnel town.
Tunnel town.
It's the Saudi Arabia tunnel town.
Tunnel town.
They're like, this works in Vegas.
But yeah, so the idea is that you live in this area where you don't need to ever really go outside this 15-minute range.
Here's my
but
problem,
if you do,
though.
you can. You just get on that bullet train.
If I do multifamily units, right? Let's say I live in a skyscraper.
Yeah.
Where am I going to put my hot tub? Where does it go?
And that's the problem. That's the reason this happened is because American consumerism took off in that post-war era.
Yeah.
And everybody wants more space, more stuff, more things.
Yeah.
And they can get it cheaper
That's
and
why
easier.
Matt, the owner of the Breakout and all that stuff.
Yeah.
He says that because I had an idea for a ping pong bar.
Yeah.
Like, how you got billiards halls and all that stuff. Just make a whole thing with a bunch of ping pong tables. And he said that it works great in New York or Los Angeles, but not in the Midwest because most people can fit a ping pong table in their house.
Yep. Yeah. So
Which is what I'm getting rid of the podcast studio. We're doing this forever. And that's my ping pong room.
that's your ping pong room. Your pong place.
My pong palace.
Pong.
You hated it so much. You didn't want to laugh at it. Why didn't you want to laugh at that, Tim? You don't want to give me the satisfaction of that one? Pong palace?
Because I wanted the alliteration.
You were trying. Oh, we'll go back in time. Ready? So I have a ping pong room.
It'll be your pong palace.
My pong palace. You're right. Yeah. Idiot. Fiddle off, dude.
Hey, thanks for watching Things I Learned Last Night. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and watch some of our other videos. They're showing up on the screen somewhere around here right now. We'll see you later.